Attorney General Pam Bondi has spent the last few hours fielding questions from members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's been a tense and confrontational hearing between Bondi and Democratic senators so far. CBS News correspondent Chanel Call has been listening in. Chanel, thank you so much for joining us today. Why is this hearing happening, and what have you heard so far?
Well, hey, Muga, good to see you. So this is an annual Justice Oversight Committee meeting, but it comes after former FBI Director James Comey was indicted by a federal grand jury. So some Democratic lawmakers now accusing the Justice Department of sort of going after people that are perceived to be enemies of President Donald Trump. Attorney General Pamela Bondi, who you see here today, facing some questions about a wide swath of topics, of issues, including her handling of the Epstein files, also the existence of that so-called client list. She was also asked today, Mugo, about the Justice Department hiring January 6ers and the Trump administration's move to deploy National Guard troops to various cities across the country. Here's more on that with Illinois Democratic Senator Dick.
One statement. That's all it took. One sentence so bold, so confidently delivered, and so easily disproven that the entire Senate Judiciary Committee hearing shifted in an instant. Attorney General Pam Bondi sat before the senators, raised her chin, and declared that the two-tiered system of justice is over. But within minutes, her own testimony began unraveling that claim piece by piece, revealing something far more troubling, that unequal justice isn't ending. It may have just become the norm. What happened in that room wasn't political theater. It wasn't routine oversight. It was a collision between power and accountability, and by the time Bondi finished speaking, she had walked herself into a legal storm that experts say could follow her for the rest of her life. Stay locked in, because the moment Bondi tried to bury the truth, she accidentally exposed something far bigger. Pam Bondi didn't enter the hearing room in a position of strength. She walked in under pressure so intense you could practically feel it through the cameras. Senators weren't there for polite exchanges or rehearsed talking points. They were laser-focused, determined to answer one question: did the Department of Justice under her leadership cross a constitutional line? And if so, did she help cover it up? The timing of this hearing wasn't an accident. It unfolded just days after former FBI Director James C. was indicted by a federal grand jury, a move that critics argue reflects a DOJ reshaped to target perceived enemies of the former president. Nothing about this was normal. Nothing about this was routine. From the opening minutes, senators signaled they were prepared to confront Bondi head-on, and they intended to walk her into corners she could no longer escape from. Democratic members of the committee opened with rapid-fire questions. No build-up, no warm-up. They went straight for the areas where Bondi was already vulnerable. They pressed her on her handling of the Epstein files and the mysterious client list that still hasn't been made public. They challenged her on reported hiring decisions involving individuals with direct ties to January 6th. They interrogated the administration's use of National Guard deployments in major U.S. cities, questioning whether those moves were motivated by public safety or political loyalty. With every question, the tension in the room tightened. Bondi tried to maintain composure, but the cracks were already showing. Senators weren't simply probing her decisions. They were circling a much deeper issue, one she couldn't explain away with talking points. And then, Bondi said something that shifted the entire direction of the hearing. It wasn't speculation, it wasn't rumor, it wasn't a misquote or misunderstanding. It was her own admission, on the record, under oath, that she signed documents after the fact to retroactively authorize a prosecutor who had already taken action on politically sensitive cases. Legal analysts watching in real time went silent. This wasn't just controversial, it was potentially unlawful. The U.S. Constitution is explicit about how federal officers must be appointed. There are no shortcuts, no retroactive band-aids, no fix-it-later options. When Bondi admitted she attempted to validate a prosecutor's authority after the prosecutions were already underway, she wasn't describing an administrative correction. She was describing an attempt to rewrite history. This is where the legal stakes explode. When constitutional violations occur, they can't be cleaned up with backdated paperwork. That's not how the system works. And Bondi knows that, which is exactly why her admission triggered alarm bells across the legal community. Reports claim DOJ attorneys themselves stated in official filings that her retroactive move was unauthorized. That detail is devastating because it shows she wasn't patching a loophole. She was stepping into legally forbidden territory. In the eyes of the law, intent isn't measured by emotion or political motive. It's measured by awareness and action. If she knew the appointment was defective and proceeded anyway, that crosses a clear line. And if she acted to conceal that defect, it becomes something far worse. The legal exposure Bondi created for herself is enormous. Constitutional experts say her actions touch multiple federal statutes with penalties ranging from decades in prison to, in some cases, life if sentences stack. Obstruction of justice is a real possibility because backdating documents during active legal proceedings is treated as an attempt to mislead courts. Abuse of office could apply as well, given the use of DOJ authority to pursue prosecutions that lacked constitutional grounding. Some analysts also point to the federal statute involving conspiracy to deprive individuals of constitutional rights under color of law. If Bondi knowingly allowed prosecutions to move forward with an unlawfully appointed official, she may have violated that statute too. These aren't fringe interpretations. These are warnings from former prosecutors, constitutional scholars, and DOJ veterans. As senators realized the magnitude of Bondi's admission, they shifted tactics. Instead of broad questions, they drilled down into specifics: dates, internal memos, emails, discussions inside DOJ leadership. They walked Bondi through the precise sequence of events: when the prosecutor acted, when the constitutional defect was discovered, when internal warnings were raised, and when Bondi signed the backdated documents. Her answers tightened the noose. She struggled to maintain a consistent timeline. She attempted to characterize the retroactive signatures as a clarification, but that argument didn't hold. Clarification affects the future. Backdating rewrites the past. And everyone in that hearing, and everyone watching from home, understood the difference. Each inconsistency raised another question. When did Bondi first learn the appointment was unconstitutional? Who advised her? Who reviewed the documents before she signed them? Were objections raised inside the department? Senators didn't need her to name every person involved. They just needed her to confirm one thing: that she didn't act alone, and she didn't deny it. That detail alone widens the legal exposure beyond a single official. It suggests coordination. And coordination opens the door to conspiracy charges, internal investigations, inspector general reviews, and possible special counsel involvement. At this stage of the hearing, you could feel the shift in Bondi's demeanor. Gone were the confident openings and sweeping defenses. Answers became shorter, more cautious. The phrase, "on advice of counsel," made its first appearance, a phrase that is technically safe but politically radioactive. Witnesses don't rely on counsel because they feel comfortable. They do it because they know the wrong sentence could alter the course of their future. Senators noticed the change immediately. Legal experts noticed, and prosecutors, if they were watching, definitely noticed. The reaction from the legal community was swift and unforgiving. Former DOJ officials across the ideological spectrum publicly stated that retroactive authority is a major red line. Courts treat backdated documents not as corrections but as attempts to mislead. And misleading a court is the kind of conduct federal prosecutors pursue aggressively. Commentators noted that Bondi's testimony didn't simply create political controversy, it created evidentiary material. Sworn testimony is permanent. It becomes evidence. It becomes reference material. It becomes the foundation for whatever comes next. And what comes next is now a central question across Washington. Senators hinted, some openly, some not so subtly, that referrals may be forthcoming. Oversight is one thing, criminal review is another, and this hearing produced enough substance to raise that possibility. Bondi attempted to reframe her actions as a difference of legal interpretation, but the argument doesn't survive contact with the facts. Legal interpretation doesn't involve backdating. Legal interpretation doesn't attempt to make unconstitutional actions appear constitutional. Courts don't treat those moves as misunderstandings. They treat them as misrepresentations. Political pressure is shifting rapidly. Lawmakers who once defended Bondi are suddenly cautious, releasing vague statements or declining to comment. That silence matters. Silence in Washington is rarely neutral. It's a signal. It means a calculation is happening, one where distance becomes safer than loyalty. Bondi now stands in a narrowing corridor of options. Cooperation with investigators could reduce exposure, but would require acknowledging wrongdoing and potentially implicating others. Fighting forward carries risk, because the evidentiary trail is already forming. Delaying may be the most dangerous option of all, because the longer this remains unresolved, the more pressure builds for formal action. The hearing's final hours were the most brutal. Senators weren't looking for new revelations at that point. They were solidifying the record. They restated Bondi's timeline out loud, locking it into the transcript. They repeated her admission, again and again, forcing her to confirm the key details that make future investigations possible. They asked whether she understood that indictments secured by an improperly appointed prosecutor could be invalidated. She acknowledged the risk. They asked why the department rushed forward despite that risk. She didn't have a convincing answer, and that silence, that inability to explain the urgency, created the most damaging impression of all. When the hearing finally ended, Bondi didn't leave with closure. She left with something heavier, a documented record of constitutional violations tied directly to her own decisions. That record is now permanent. It can be studied, cited, challenged, questioned, and used in court. It will follow her into every meeting, every interview, every legal discussion for months, maybe years. And whatever happens next, whether investigators pursue charges, whether referrals turn into indictments, whether Bondi chooses to cooperate or fight, all of it will begin with the testimony she delivered under oath. But here's the part that should concern every American. This isn't just about one official, one department, or one hearing. It's about whether constitutional limits still mean what they say. It's about whether the justice system remains accountable to the law or bends under political pressure. And it's about the precedent that will be set by what happens next. Because if the nation's top law enforcement officials can bypass the Constitution and attempt to rewrite the past, the consequences reach far beyond a single scandal. If you want to stay ahead of this unfolding legal storm, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand the stakes. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Stay alert. Because what happens next won't just shape Pam Bondi's future. It may shape the future of American justice itself.